Hello friends and welcome. My name is Kavi and I want to introduce a special episode of the Conversations with Amoda Maa. A couple of weeks ago, Amoda and I put on an online event where we talked about and offered up some insights on the mystery of grace. Amoda offered a discourse on grace itself, and I offered up some poems from my new book, Poems of Grace. And then we had a conversation that talked about the openness of love, the mystery of grace, and what it means to live a life of openness, really. And it was a very beautiful conversation, and there were quite a few people online who seemed to resonate with it in a beautiful way. So we thought, why not? Let's offer this up as a special podcast and hopefully video. And so you're invited to just relax into it and enjoy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Letting the mind be as it is. Just like the waves on the ocean, there's nothing you need to do. If there is thought activity, just let it be. Whatever is here, sensation, feeling, emotion, let everything be as it is. The simplicity of presence. Nothing needs to change. And no effort is required here. Allowing the silence that is beneath all things, prior to all movements, to quietly reveal itself. And let's speak of grace. And when we speak of grace, we're speaking of something intimate, very subtle. It's not something the mind can understand. It's not something that we can grasp or take possession of, or make it happen by some force of will. Neither is it something that we earn by being good, by being spiritual. Grace belongs to a deeper order of reality we may call the mystery. Not the mystery in the sense of something supernatural, but as the mysterious movement of life that reveals itself when the personal begins to soften. It's the quiet benevolence of being itself. It's the light of truth shining through cracks in the identity. It's what becomes visible when the separate self, with all its strategies and attempts to control life, begins to loosen its grip. Essentially, grace is what reveals itself when the doer is out of the way. Because even the spiritual search is most often carried by the doer, the one who wants to awaken, the one who wants to be at peace, the one who wants to be enlightened or free. So the longing for truth gets tangled up with this sense of me trying to get somewhere, trying to become something. But grace doesn't belong to that separate self. It begins to reveal itself when the effort that comes from that separate self starts to exhaust itself. When the separate self becomes transparent. Not because we've finally worked out how to do surrender, But because life brings us to the very edge where the personal self can no longer do anything. When something in us becomes tired of the endless project of becoming, there's the crack in identity. There's the moment where there can be a softening. It can be in a moment of insecurity, or a moment of heartbreak, or a moment of failure, or a moment of deep existential questioning. Suffering isn't necessary, but suffering often exposes the limits of the separate self, because the separate self can't bring us all the way home. It's at this point, at this edge, that something deeper begins to open. And then grace is like an open hand that holds us when we don't know how to hold ourselves. And it's an unseen hand that opens us when we don't know how to open ourselves. We often think of grace as something dramatic, a miracle, a blessing, a divine intervention. Usually when we've deemed ourselves worthy, when life turns in our favor, perhaps when we've experienced some kind of synchronicity or healing or circumstance that proves that this is so. But really, if we keep on looking for grace in the extraordinary, we miss the grace in the ordinary, which is its most intimate expression. It's the breath that continues to breathe without effort. It's the morning light that touches our skin when we haven't done anything to deserve it. It's the softening of the heart when it could have remained closed. It's the stillness just beneath the mind's turbulence. It's the simple fact of awareness, before thought, before feeling, before the story of who we are. So grace is always here. When we stop insisting that life must conform to our preferences, when the doer is not in charge, when the ego's grip is not at the forefront of our experience, because it's this grip that obscures the deeper intelligence in life, the deeper wisdom, the presence that's always here, the simplicity of openness. We don't have to be perfect. We simply need to stop performing, pretending to be spiritual, or pretending to be wise, or pretending to be composed. Or it's the invitation to simply be here, naked, without the usual armoring of identity. And then grace reveals itself as simply the movement of life, the movement of breath, the movement of life's intelligence, so that everything, whether it's loss or grief or beauty, all of it is a movement when we stop resisting. And then there's a natural gratitude. It's a current that flows through us, the quiet revelation that we are never separate from the light that we seek. And grace is always here. When the doer becomes quiet, it's the very radiance of being itself. And so, because the mind can't quite grasp this, because words are not really sufficient, it's possible that poetry is a doorway to the fragrance of grace. And poetry can speak to where philosophy cannot, or where language cannot, where any explanation cannot reach. So poetry can bypass the grasping mind and touch the heart directly. And so I'd like to invite Kavi in his poems of grace to invite us to simply listen, to soften and to be touched, to not use the mind to try and understand, and to allow this to be a doorway. So I think, Kavi, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks. It's always difficult to follow Amoda's clarity and light and grace, really, and wisdom. But by way of, so I haven't prepared anything, any great speech or anything like that. But in contemplating during what you were saying, I realized that really it's not really because of me that these poems have come about. Really, these are the poems that have arisen out of the field of love. Yeah, the essence of Amoda Maa's teaching and the fragrance of our relationship in many ways that has allowed this troubled, self-seeking, artistic, wayward, kind of deep human being that is me to relax just enough, to let go of himself and his own needs just enough to be able to serve or speak to something a little bit deeper than just me and what I have to say. And so, the blessing really is on me in some ways to be able to have found something in this existence that allowed me to get out of the way enough that something beautiful could come through me, and I don't have to take any particular ownership of it. I can say that these hands have had something to do with it, that the vehicle, the mind, the something has had something to do with it. But it's a kind of collaborative way of being, from the divine, from the ineffable, from the mysterious, from the deep, from the high, from the inside, through us all here at Amoda Maa Foundation, and into existence. My influences, of course, have been Rumi and Kabir and Hafiz, but not only that, also the existentialists of Camus and Sartre, and the Beat generation of Jack Kerouac and Ginsberg, and the crazies and the misfits and the wild ones, all the musicians. Back there, I wanted desperately to be a musician in some way, or at least a creative performer in some sort of way. And so I've always had this kind of capacity but now it's sort of something cooked up within me, something deeper cooked up within me, and I found myself being a Kavi. Kavi was a name given to me way back in the early 2000s by somebody I stumbled into in a in Germany, who said your name is not whatever it was back then. And she went away and came back and said your name is Kavi. And little realizing that Kavi in Sanskrit means poet or poem, and I wasn't actively or in any way seeking to become a poet or be a poet. I don't really think of myself as a poet. I do think of myself poetically, but it was really thanks to her that started this kind of thing. And 20 years later, there's a book, and there's something that does bypass the mind beautifully, beautifully, and that's in a way why I think, called this Poems of Grace. And I'll read a poem about grace. The thing I love about some of these beautiful words like surrender and grace is that, particularly grace, is that actually I don't really know what it means. I have no idea what it means, but I know that it sort of tears bits of the mind up and allows something deeper to flow through. And that's part of the reason why I love it, because that which stills the mind, that which quiets the mind, that which bypasses the mind, allows something deeper. We could call it soul, spirit, heart. It doesn't matter what we call it, but there it is. And to me, that's the essence of the garden that I write about, the garden that I go on about, not religiously, but metaphorically, something deep within us where beautiful things grow. But we have to be prepared to kind of plunge within sometimes in order to touch those. And the touching of that depth also carries a grace. Grace is of the deep, not just the highest. And I, for one, am unafraid of the deep. So let me read this. This is not in the book, but it speaks to grace itself, the mystery of grace. The word itself, the word itself points toward the ineffable, as though touched by some quiet divine essence. A certain dignity lives within it, a reverence for the human condition. We glimpse its fragrance even in sorrow, when suffering is held lightly by a gracious hand. Perhaps grace is the bridge between our fragile humanity and the divine nature that breathes us. I love it because I cannot grasp it, cannot define it, and I cannot possess it. There is a beauty in surrendering the need to do any of those things. For then grace can remain untouched, free to move as it wishes, entering the heart, the soul, the body, without being captured by any explanation. The moment we try too hard to describe it, we place our hands around its throat. But when we fall quiet, when we loosen the mind's demand to know, grace appears again, soft as evening light through a window, as ancient as sorrow, as tender as forgiveness. And suddenly, even this ordinary life seems held by something vastly sacred. I'm going to read one more that didn't make it into the book, I think, as I just discovered this morning, thanks to our editor. I am the cry of a child at night. I am the dawn chorus that welcomes the day, and the mournful longing of a whale in the deep. I am the silence that remains at the end of all movement, and the movement of form as it dances through eternity. I am everywhere and nowhere, an action and a beingness. If you try and locate me in space and time, you will be searching for the air. I am you, the tree, the cloud, and the sky in which it hangs. I am the flash of eyes in a moment of recognition, and that which is recognized. That which I was seeking, I was already.
I love that one. I
You
do.
like that?
Yes, very much so.
Let's press on with another couple, yeah?
Mm.
I'll just meet this day empty. Don't just carry yesterday's bags into this fresh moment. Eventually, you will become so weary. This empty meeting is all you really need. Allow life to whisper its secrets into the bowl of your silence. It will cleanse you, and from this will arise your innate knowing, your clear seeing, and your love. Let the wind pass through you. Let sorrow dissolve in stillness. Do not grip, do not chase. Even truth need not be held. Be the open window through which existence breathes and sings itself awake in your heart. Once you catch the fragrance of the garden, my friend, you will follow it forever. For love's scent is irresistible, and all we really want is to lose ourselves in its embrace, to vanish into the bloom of its beauty, to be carried by the wind of its longing until nothing remains but the fragrance itself. Hold on. Let me speak to your dream body. Let me speak to your dream body and whisper words of openness that may awaken it to remember its truth. Let me say things that stir your soul and remind you of something almost forgotten, become just a faint cry in the distance. Let me speak of beauty and grief, of sorrow and sadness, but also of joy and love, and rekindle your inner flame, so easily extinguished in this harsh world. That small voice within, let me encourage it and tug at it. Let me say, yes, you can, even amidst the no, you cannot. There is so much more to us than this superficial living knows, a life that dwells quietly and secretly below the surface. Let me speak to that. so it may come alive and animate your every breath. You reach out in the darkness, in your grief or loneliness. An invisible hand gently touches you, and a cool breeze wipes the tears away. Grace is ever present. I'm going to read this. I usually read this at retreats, I noticed, not by design, but simply because it comes out. Oh, I think so anyway. Love is above everything. And then I've got another one on there that I'm going to read. Love is above everything. It soars over our heads like the canopy of stars, the firmament itself. Love is the cosmos eternal. It is the garden we never left, the gaze of innocence before the fall and after the fall is forgiven. Love holds the universe together. It is the weave of the cloth and the weaver. All things are wrapped up in love. When you taste it, it changes everything. It might be the first time you have ever met yourself. Because love is not something you feel for another. It is the very stuff of life. It is what you are made of, and suddenly you realize it. In our amnesia, we walk the earth, searching for something, a lover, a god, a dream, a cure, something to make us feel whole again. But we are already whole, and it is only the forgetting that casts the shadow. I'm going to read this one that is not in the book, but it might be in a future book. For already book number 2 is forming itself. This is called There Will Be Flowers Again. After being lost for so long, all I found was darkness. There was no light to be seen. Yet something inside kept pulling me inward and onward, unraveling, unmasking. Time passed, months, years, and in the clearing, empty now and open, a tender shoot lifted its head, then another, then another. The soil had been fertile all along, rich with all that had fallen there. The flowers turned their faces to the sun, but never forgot the darkness they emerged from. Friend, the soil of your being is not as barren as it feels, not as ruined as it appears. Beneath the grief, beneath the fear, something sacred is waiting to grow. Till the ground with your attention, your love, your willingness to remain. Stay true through the seasons of emptiness. Water the unseen with a quiet devotion, and one day, where you thought nothing could live, there will be flowers.
There are many threads in what has been expressed through some of these poems that touch aspects of my own journey. So a little personal reflection, perhaps, of how grace revealed itself. Yeah, I remember a time in my 20s, I think there was something in your, not this poem, but the one just before, I think, that sort of touched this, where I felt that life was a machine. Everything was like a cog in the machine of society, the machine of culture, the machine of human beings all fitting in, doing. And it was a very dark place, a meaningless place. I don't have to go into all that, but what it has reflected in me now was that, looking back on it, it was the self that was in the way. It was the self trying to get somewhere, trying to be somebody, trying to be good enough, trying to achieve academic success, trying to get my father's love, all this trying, all this efforting in order to be good enough. Now, I didn't have the emotional or spiritual awareness at that time to realize it, but it was such a block. So everything became machine-like. It was quite a dark existential place. And the contrast of that with what happened many, many years later, and actually a number of years after awakening, and again, a very visceral feeling as you spoke the poems, Kavi, standing in our apartment in England and looking out the window, and there were, my mother was dying, and we had our own human issues in life, challenges and whatever. And there was such a palpable sense of grace. The grace because there was no more self in the way of anything. The end of resistance, the end of resistance to what is, to what is, to what is, so that all of it was felt as the movement of grace, the river of grace, everything. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was the wrong timing. Nothing was, it shouldn't be happening. And everything unfolded into the next and the next. And it was as if it was held in this invisible field of goodness, is all I could describe. Now, if one examined the actual details of our lives, the detail of my life, the detail of your life, Kavi, you would say that, we could have looked at failure, we could have looked at death, we could have looked at loss, we could have looked at a whole number of things that are part of the human experience. But that was not the experience. It was all this goodness, godness. To me, that was grace, and that was the most palpable time. So the whole of this life and this self was just transparent. And I guess it has continued to be, but that's what your poems speak of to me. So dark, light, this, that, all dissolves in the movement of that. And the mind stops looking for the blessing. The mind stops looking for the reward. It's such a subtle current that moves in this life. And I think it's available to each of us, if only the self that is seeking to become somebody, seeking to have this life or that life according to some image that it wants to reach or possess, whether it's spiritual or human or worldly. It's that gets in the way.
You know, I, you, it was only really because of you. You kind of taught me or showed me. You didn't teach me anything, but you showed me and you know, I was kind of cynical, I think, or broken, really, you know, in the complexity of my personality before I stumbled through grace into your orbit. And and then I began to realize, I think, that you had an ineffable, innate sense of joy where somewhere within you that didn't negate the human experience, but neither did it seek to escape it. And you know, that's confounding to somebody who was, you know, broken or cynical or beaten up or, you know, experienced so much failure and all of that illness that I went through and all of this stuff. And yet still there was this sort of what I would call the fragrance. Uh, and I don't know, you know, I don't know what other people do, but it was like, is that for real? Are you for real? Are you really saying there's a kind of a weave of beauty, of innocence, of joy, of quiet joy that doesn't need a cause, that doesn't even need a self, you know, running through this. And I remember, you know, when we moved to America, when we moved people to America, we moved with nothing. We moved empty. We moved, you know, people have thought that I've been a successful musician and I've been supporting Amoda throughout this kind of journey. We've had that. We've had, oh, you're okay, Amoda, because you're supported by a successful musician. If you only knew how much failure there has been in
It's
my
amazing
life.
how that often is projected onto us just because you wear some cool sunglasses sometimes, Kavi.
It's hilarious. So we came to America on a because of a motor, because of a book, because of an idea. We came over with 2 suitcases and a friend who'd offered to put us up for a while, for 3 months that ended up as 3 years in a in the most beautiful, exquisite part of California, Sausalito, just outside San Francisco. And so we landed in paradise, but we'd really arrived in many ways from a sort of hell of our own trappedness. And and it was tough, you know. It was beautiful, it was wild, it was new, but it was also tough. And one day when we were out walking somewhere on the bay, we stopped, and in the middle of the toughness, it wasn't Amoda's toughness, it was mine. You know, I carried myself wherever I've been, trouble wherever I've been. She said, you know, cherish everything, cherish everything. Not in terms of owning it or grabbing it, but simply because the movement of life is a river. We haven't got as much control as we think we want. And if you just surrender into the cherishing, into this and into this and into this from an ever deeper place within you, then actually life just flows along. Sometimes it flows in your favor according to the mind, and sometimes it doesn't. And this had a profound effect on me, as many things she said and been have had a profound effect on me. But what I realized was I didn't have to exclude my own darkness, my own depth. I'm a very deep person, very feel things really deeply. I'm ultra sensitive, as most people are. And suddenly I realized, well, not suddenly, but it dawned on me that I didn't have to exclude anything and that it was okay. It was okay. It's just okay. Even in the realm of form that we all navigate in this tempestuous world that we seek to control and run away from and understand, and it's okay.
That's why that your poem, I don't know what the title is, but the one where you speak of I am the
Yeah.
trees, I am the form, I am the not form, I am you, I am not you, or whatever. I'm not saying it quite right, but that one really speaks because that is 100% where I stand, if you like, although there's nobody here to stand anywhere. It's that which we seek, whether we call it God or awakeness or truth or love or grace, all these many names that point to the nameless, is in everything. It is everything. It is both the form and the formless. It is both the nothingness and the everythingness. And everythingness is not just an object, the tree, the this, the that. Everythingness is everything that we experience, the waves that we experience, whether it's challenge, whether it's intensity, whether it's loss, whether it's this, whether it's that, whether it's bliss, whether it's joy. All of it is I am that. God is that. God is all of it. So cherish everything is to be one with God. There is no separation anymore. So simply the self that is trying to control and fix and, hold on to this experience, but not, and reject that experience, all of it. I mean, like moment to moment, not just the big things that happen to us, moment to moment, every breath. Yeah. That's it.
I think that it's also for me that the I am the cry of the child at night and the wail in the deep and all these things. I recognize that that's a sort of non-dual poem about consciousness, but also has the divine essence of, the old mystics in it. But also, for me, I've never been particularly interested in spirituality. As you know, I can't, everything becomes a thing too quickly and too easily for the mind to put everything in a box. And so I've always been out of the box of any definition, as I know you have. But so, to come up with a poem, I am that, Nisargadatta, I am the cry of, it's like it sort of speaks to the awareness of us. But I also, what this has allowed me is to speak, like you just said, to the depth of us, to the brokenness of us, so that that brokenness and that depth is not excluded. Neither is it indulged over necessarily and created a story out of, but it is allowed to be there, because if we can't embrace and allow our brokenness, our vulnerability, our tenderness, our grief to also be here in the field of our love, then it's exclusive, and I have no part in a spirituality that is exclusive in that way. So that it allows everything, as we say again and again, to come home.
Yeah, the problem isn't the brokenness or the grief or the this, the despair or whatever. That's not the problem. It's the identification with it that's the problem. Without self, all of it is an expression of, in some ways, the benevolence of being, or it's an expression of being, let's say. And when the self isn't there to take its identity from it, then it is felt on the deep level as the benevolence of God, not as the punishment, nor the obstruction. Everything becomes benevolent, even the darkness, even the loss, even the death, all of it.
What happened, to put everything into a little bit of another context, in a way, was that I did always imagine I would be a musician until I passed from this existence. And after the first retreat we did after COVID, I did music and I played music, and it was after that retreat that I realized I was finished with trying to be anything, with being a musician. And it evoked, not over-grandized, but it evoked Hazrat Inayat Khan, who is the most divine being, who played his, I think it was a sitar, world famous, really. And at a certain stage in his life, he decided to put it down and just speak directly, just be direct, without any of the music that is a beautiful transportation vehicle for expression. But at a certain point, we can just meet face to face, heart to heart, beautiful. And that involved a kind of a renewal of a vulnerability in me, that allowed that vulnerability or tenderness. Maybe it's not vulnerability, it's a loaded word, but a kind of tenderness of me to kind of come through and say, yes, I am a tender human being, and still I will speak majestic words that flow through from somewhere else, and to be unafraid in that respect. My poetry has become unafraid. I don't care about fear anymore because I've seen through the illusion of it to something that's way, way deeper, that holds us all, even in all this. So I'm very grateful. I really.
I think that the trying to become a musician, whilst there was a genuine talent and affinity for that, no doubt, but it carried with it many aspects and identities from the past, from the history. And so in order to know this beauty and grace and innocence, if you like, of your true nature, not in the conventional non-dual way or spiritual way, but in your own unique way, that had to fall away, so that the poetry doesn't come with that baggage. It doesn't come with any threads from the past. It's very fresh and in the now. So I think that's what happened. A whole identity shell of, a casing of identity fell apart, which was, a big thing in some ways because it had been carried
Yeah.
for a long time.
I mean, yeah, there have been many deaths, people in this life. Moda's had many deaths, and I've had many deaths, and all of them have been cherished, and all, well, maybe not at the time, but certainly all of them have brought us to this moment of just doing this, and this moment passes, and then we get on and do some more kind of teaching, and all of it is held exquisitely, I feel. I love all of this. This is so beautiful. It's tender but beautiful. So, well, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Amoda.
Mm-hmm.
So let me finish with a, shall I finish with a couple of these? There's a couple of short poems just to finish out. Die empty of self. We are flowers in the garden, stars in the night sky, the refraction of light and the appearance in form of the divine. Don't waste this precious time. Love others, be of service, die empty of self. This fragile life, this tightrope we walk, a fragile mix of joy and sorrow, the recognition of suffering and the scent of the garden, a peace hidden deep within the horror and the inevitability of death. Yet still the capacity to live as though forever, and the noble pursuit of love already embedded within us. What grace, this life, what grace.